Good afternoon. We're happy for you to be here at this session on biological properties of plants. Plants are our friends, and if we know how to use them correctly, they can enhance our health. There's nowhere in Scripture that you find a Sermon on the Mount devoted to healthy lifestyle. There's no big five in wellness in the Bible. You don't find any of the Gospels which list New Start program. I haven't seen any. You don't find any narrative about how to get 8 hours of sleep, or to eat more fruits and vegetables, or to learn how to better manage stress, or to drink 6 or 8 cups of water every day. There's no passages in Scripture telling you to walk 20,000 steps every day, exercising for 30 minutes. Nothing about the health-promoting properties of garlic or turmeric. When the apostles were sent out by Jesus 2 by 2, they don't appear with their hydrotherapy equipment. They don't provide free massage in the villages. In the time of the Bible, there was no internet, no Facebook, no Twitter to keep people up past midnight talking to their social friends. People walked from village to village. There was no McDonald's on every street corner. People took time to have meaningful relationships with one another. We learnt yesterday with Dr. Harding, the Hebrew concept of Shalom was a total lifestyle package involving restoration of the whole person. Health and wellness involves physical, mental, spiritual, social, environmental. It included prosperity, security, a clean and safe environment. This was the Hebrew concept of Shalom, which is their idea of health. When Jesus was here on earth, he provided a comprehensive package of teaching, preaching, and healing. But today we have adopted the Greek model, and we've fragmented human beings into pieces. The physician is sought out to deal with health problems. The pastor, he deals with spiritual problems. The psychiatrist with emotional problems, while the social worker deals with family problems. So many people are challenged today to rethink in terms of the holistic model. Health and healing is viewed more than just lowering blood pressure and cholesterol levels, in controlling blood glucose levels, and turning people into fitness gurus. The biblical paradigm of health includes living a lifestyle in which we reflect more fully the image of God. I want to submit to you today that health is more about God than it is about me or you, about how you feel and how you look. It's about His work and His service. When we walk in partnership with God, we are promised protection from common diseases. and we enjoy a long and prosperous life. On the other hand, when we live an unhealthy lifestyle, we handicap ourselves from enjoying partnership with God. Sleep deprived, high on stress, the use of unhealthy substances that affect our memory, these things all depreciate the value of our service to God and our relationship with other people. Inactivity encourages the advancement of disease processes. This workshop is entitled The Healing Properties of Plants. So the question is, with that background, where do herbs and healing fit into this big picture that I've just painted of health and healing? Do botanical products have a place in today's world where life is lived in the fast lane? Should herbals be relegated to the ancient world of folklore that has no place in today's scientific world that demands evidence-based research for credibility? The World Health Organization, WHO, estimates that about 80% of the world's population use traditional medicine for their primary health care needs. And a major part of this involves plant extracts. Many Western drugs, like digitalis, quinine, aspirin, owe their origin to a plant extract. In 1993, the National Institutes of Health opened its new Office of Alternate Medicine to systematically study botanical medicine and alternate medical approaches. People today are frustrated by the high cost of Western medicine and the side effects that come from this, and they are turning more to simple natural remedies, including prayer and exercise, as the research data would show that people are finding these, along with botanical products, as useful alternatives. The sale of herbal products in the United States increases at about 3% a year. Presently, $5 billion in the United States is spent annually. Globally, the retail sale of botanicals has reached $25 billion. There's a widespread belief that botanical products are natural. They have few, if any, side effects, and therefore they are superior to synthetic drugs. Because herbs are natural doesn't mean they're always safe. Some are not safe, and some can be made unsafe by improper or abusive use. As we know, there are poisonous plants, poisonous mushrooms, poisonous berries, and we have to exercise care and discretion in what we eat. Herbal products are also called botanicals. They are part of the plant that's used for medicinal value or for flavor or for aroma. When were herbs created? They were created on the third day, along with food plants. When you analyze many herbs, particularly the ones we use in culinary purposes, there is not a lot of difference from food plants. It's just that we use them in smaller amounts, in concentrated form. The health promoting properties of these spices are a bonus, of course. Now, what I want to do in the 4 hours that we have is we've divided the lecture into 3 parts. The first part is going to be on the herbs and the spices in the Bible times, and then during the 19th century, during the time of Ellen White. and then moving on into today and what we know about spices today. The second part, we will talk about medicinal herbs that people use for menstrual problems or prostate problems or high blood pressure or other things like that. The third part of the lecture will be devoted to how to avoid scams with herbal products and other products that are being promoted. How do we know whether something is safe and real? So first of all, let's take a look at the Bible. There are not a lot of references. I've just chosen a few here that talk about herbal natural products. In the Old Testament, we read about King Hezekiah, who became ill to the point of death. And the king, as you know, pleaded with God to spare his life. Through the prophet Isaiah, Hezekiah was instructed to make a poultice of figs that were prepared and applied to his boils, to his sores. Why didn't God heal him instantly? Through this means of using the figs, God provided healing for the king. That's recorded in 2 Kings. Was Hezekiah healed by the healing properties of the fig poultice or by the power of God? Or both? Or was it his faith in the Word of God? Well, the natural remedy, blessed by God, provided the healing. The God of nature directed the human agent to use natural remedies. An aromatic resin that was derived from a small flowering evergreen tree that grew near the Dead Sea in the Jordan River Valley was a very highly prized substance. This, that was called the balm of Gilead, was commonly used for healing purposes. It's referenced there for you on the screen. And then we come to the story of the New Testament in John chapter 9, where Jesus healed a blind man. How was he healed? Was it the healing property of Jesus' spittle? Was it the mud? The healing properties in the mud? Was it the healing properties of the water of Shalom where he was sent? Or was it just a placebo effect? Was it the man's faith in the word of Jesus which led to his obedience to go and wash in the pool? Or was it all of the above? In the ancient world, we know that the spit of a distinguished person was believed to have curative properties. Perhaps Jesus used the customs of his time to his advantage to persuade the man of the healing that was to be gained. The efficacy of any treatment or any medicine depends at least as much on the person's faith as it does in the treatment or the drug itself. We'll come back to this in the next lecture. In the New Earth, we read about the tree of life whose leaves are for healing. During the Middle Ages, abbeys and monasteries had herb gardens where many well-known botanicals were grown, such as lavender and sage and peppermint and dandelion. These provided relief for a variety of chronic conditions such as inflammation, indigestion, and urinary problems. We move down to the 19th century, to the time of Ellen White. She wrote very much about simplifying our life, getting back to the basics, using natural remedies, the simple agencies of nature, fresh air, water, proper diet, regular exercise, a purity of life, a firm trust in God. These are the remedies, she said, for the want of which thousands are dying. These things are within the reach of all, but with little expense. These are the simple herbs that can be used for the recovery of the sick. She urged to make use of these simple remedies, such as some of the simple herbs growing in the field. These herbs are harmless, the use of which would tide over many apparently serious difficulties. In chapter 30 of the book 2 of Selected Messages, she outlines the importance of charcoal and water treatments and simple remedies such as eucalyptus and herbal teas and aromatherapy. On page 301, we read, "Light was given that there is health in the fragrance of pine, cedar, and the fir tree. And there are other kinds of trees that have medicinal properties that are health promoting." And she warned that we not cut down these trees, that they are useful in providing health for us. In the Bible times, we recognize that various spices were used, particularly in Egypt, but also were carried other places. Egypt, of course, was a market gardening economy where they grew vegetables irrigated by the Nile. So garlic and onions and leeks were very common then. During the Passover, we're familiar with the Jewish people, the Hebrews, preparing bitter herbs. And some of the local herbs that are listed here, watercress, dandelion, chicory, endive, sorrel, these are commonly used even today as bitter herbs to celebrate the Passover. Hyssop grew abundantly in the stony ground in Israel, and in the Arabic, zatar, mixed with salt and olive oil. This was eaten with bread, commonly in baking and cooking. And then, of course, we have mentioned in the New Testament some herbs which typically in a small garden near the house, these were just for relish, for enhancing the meal, and these were not to be tithed. But of course we read in Scripture that the Pharisees were so legalistic that they even tithed these small clumps of herbs that were used. Dill and mint and cumin were commonly grown there. And then, of course, we know about wild coriander, which in the Old Testament was described as the manna that fell from heaven, looked like coriander, commonly a winter crop in Israel and used in cooking as a condiment. So moving now into the 19th century from biblical times, we just take a look at some of the things that Ellen White actually recommended, largely in the Selected Messages, Book 2. We read about catnip tea having sedative properties, also hot tea, eucalyptus and honey, which was used for treatment of coughs, which we still use today. And then we already mentioned the medicinal property of certain evergreen trees. And then she mentioned quite a bit about simple herbs of the field that could be used to treat simple remedies that would prevent people running to the doctor all the time. But she also mentioned quite a bit about spices, and it's interesting to look, as I've done recently, into some of the literature of the 19th century, trying to ascertain what did she mean by spices. Okay, in going through the index to Ellen White, we came up with these sorts of expressions regarding spices. They irritate and inflame the lining of the stomach. They act like a fiery whip. They make the blood feverish and impure and destroy health. They create an appetite for something stronger and more stimulating. They excite the animal propensities They make us slaves to the base passions. What do all these things mean in the context of her culture? They weaken the moral and intellectual powers. They produce nervousness and irritability of temper. The appetite is perverted. There is no relish for wholesome, plain food. Okay, now what did she understand by the word spice? What did it encompass? What was she referring to? What products do all these things apply to? Well, if you look in her writings, wherever she uses the word spices, she also accompanies it with other words commonly, and that gives us some kind of clue. Mustard, pepper, pickles, condiments, flesh meats, mince pies, sausage, rich cakes and pastries, a large amount of salt, pickles, grease, butter, cheese, tea and coffee, and rich gravies. Okay, that's the context in which the word spices always appears, with one or a number of these words. Gives us a feel for what she's referring to, perhaps. In her own writings, she says that condiments are injurious in nature, and she does mention spices along with mustard, pepper, pickles, and other things that irritate the stomach. Food should be prepared simply, free from condiments and spices. Now, with that background in mind, let's turn to the current literature of her age. Catherine Beecher, the founder of the home economics movement in America, she wrote in her book in 1856, which was 7 years before the famous health vision. Condiments were considered by all the health reformers during this period as being stimulants to the nervous system, as leading to exhaustion. Okay, that was prevalent amongst all the health reformers, not Adventists, but all the health reformers in America at this time. Now, Catherine Beecher in her book wrote, remember this is 1856, quoting, "Condiments stimulate the appetite to an unnatural degree. Pepper, mustard, and spices are the most commonly used. These articles are inflammatory in their nature and stimulating to the nervous system." Now that sounds almost like Ellen White wrote it. Okay, the language is so common, expressing the sentiment of health reformers in those days. Now, if you look through the writings of Ellen White, on the left-hand side of the screen there, you'll see what I have compiled by analysing her works. An X means she talks negatively about it. A plus means she talks positively about it. A question mark leaves you guessing as to whether she's for it or against it. So essentially, pepper, black pepper, mustard, and this word that we still haven't quite defined, spices, which is used 60 times, these are all said negatively. Whereas ginger, she spoke positively of. Cinnamon and cloves, we're not sure. You can't really determine from the context totally whether she's for it or against it, or just making a passing comment. On the right-hand side, you will see many other herbs and spices which we commonly use today. And of these, she is totally silent. She says nothing, absolutely nothing. So it comes for some people as a surprise that garlic is a spice, okay? And fenugreek is a spice. Vanilla, turmeric are spices, okay? But nothing is said. So immediately we run into a conflict here. If we take our concept of spices today and transport it over to the 19th century, we're in trouble, because it means we have to eliminate all turmeric, all garlic, all ginger, all of these things from our well, not ginger, but many of the others from our dietary. Now, two other leading health proponents during this time, Dr. Hitchcock and Dr. Trawl. You may have heard Trawl mentioned because he was associated with the early pioneers. But Dr. Hitchcock was president of Amherst College. I lived in the town for a number of years, and I went to the library and researched some of the documents there. And Dr. Hitchcock mentioned 5 types of condiments. You might be surprised, but this is what he listed as condiments: fats, sweets, vinegar, salt, and spices. Okay, so if you were to put this in the context of Ellen White's writings, which were written similar, this was 1830, and she wrote later in the century, you would see that it's the kinds of foods that we tend not to highlight today as healthy: fats and sweets, vinegar, and so forth. Dr. Trawl, he was a little more specific. He mentioned mustard, pepper, cayenne, but also mentioned salt and vinegar. So the question then is, what were these offending condiments that Mrs. White spoke about? Americans developed a great taste for condiments, spices, and sauces that heightened and sometimes transformed the flavor of foods and stimulated the appetite to an unnatural degree. Common offenders were mustard, hot red peppers, native to the USA, as well as imported black pepper. This again was taken from Catherine Beecher's book that we mentioned earlier, and this is the title that's given here: Physiology and Calisthenics for Schools and Families. This is one of her books. So in conclusion, my take on what Mrs. White says about spices and condiments refers particularly to red chili pepper, black pepper, mustard, pickles, and what I would call as stimulating sauces, hot, bitey, things that are hot when they're cold, when they're served cold, okay? This seems to be the best understanding we can come to. Now, there is some research on chili pepper. It's very rich in capsaicin and other capsaicinoids, very high levels, and these have a burning sensation, as you're aware of. They irritate the mucous membrane, and they, when used in large quantities, they can cause or aggravate ulcers. And there was a large study that was done by Johns Hopkins University amongst Mexican people, and they found that stomach cancer increased with the level of chili pepper consumption. This, of course, are high levels. Consumers of chili peppers had 5.5 times greater risk of stomach cancer compared to non-users. For those with a very high level of consuming, the risk was 17 times greater. Similar studies have been done in India, where large consumption of red pepper is connected with ulcers and cancers of the GI tract. Black pepper, it's more ambiguous. The data would show that the black pepper, of course, comes from the unripe berries that turn black when dried, and they're commonly used as a condiment. The white peppercorns are the ripened berries whose seed is used as white pepper. And in the research, there is conflicting data. Some research shows that it may be associated with some cancer. Other studies show that it may protect in small amounts against cancer. And I think my summary of the pepper would be this: when used with small amounts, there are certain chemicals in them which help protect against cancer. When they are used commonly and in large amounts, they are associated with cancer. And this is not an uncommon thing you see in nutrition, where small amounts may be beneficial and large amounts can be toxic. This is true of many vitamins and minerals in small amounts, very useful. In large amounts, they can be toxic and have definite problems in the body. So from there, we want now to move to today, 2013. What do we know about spices today? Well, I have good news in that there is a lot of interesting research that's come out in the last few years that show that spices are useful to protect us against chronic diseases, heart disease or cardiovascular disease, cancer and diabetes. And we're going to quickly, in the few minutes we have, going to go through some of the research papers that show us how these things protect us. But before we do that, I just want to define for you herb and spice, because a lot of people get these mixed up. A herb are the leaves from a plant, okay? Whereas spices are the aromatic pieces of the plant, the bark, the root, the tuber, the stem, the flowers, the bud, that have concentrated terpenoids and other compounds that provide the nice flavour and fragrance when we're cooking. Okay, so there's that difference. This is the way in Western society we now designate a herb from a spice. A herb is the foliage, spices are the concentrated extracts from all the other different parts of the plant. So to give an example to make it clear, herbs would be basil, cilantro, dill, oregano, parsley, sage, etc. Whereas spices are like cumin, garlic, cloves, ginger, cinnamon. Okay, so you get the picture? They're very, very differently used in today's food industry. And of course, these substances are derived from different parts of the plants. And you see listed here, you know, cinnamon comes from bark, and garlic comes from a bulb, and cloves comes from flower buds, and the anise is from the fruit, and fenugreek and cumin is from seeds, etc. So different parts of the plant will surrender their usefulness. And not only food, but also beverages. You're very familiar with buying teas and so forth that have pepper or vanilla or cinnamon or ginger or hibiscus in them. These are all providing a small amount of phytochemicals that can in fact provide some health. Okay, so let's come to the very important topic here. We show the three categories that we're going to talk about: cancer prevention, cardiovascular protection, and improving glycemic or glucose control. And we've listed there some of the spices or some of the herbs that actually provide the protection. And I'm going to move on straight away and look at, there are some herbs that help lower cholesterol. Okay, now please, these are not equated to the same efficiency as a statin. Okay, we're not talking about medication to that degree. These provide levels of 5 or 10% reduction in cholesterol levels. Garlic, and in brackets there, for those of you who read the English, is the phytochemical, the active substance that is in the spice that provides the property to lower cholesterol, okay? So this is not folklore, this is not magic, mumbo jumbo. These compounds have been identified and have been shown to be responsible for having this effect. So garlic, psyllium, fenugreek, flaxseed, lemongrass, and turmeric, okay? These are all in the literature. I don't have individual references here, but they're available. Now, garlic is probably at the top of the list, and we know that it can help reduce atherosclerosis. It has anti-clotting properties. The vinyl thiones will inhibit clotting effect. It lowers cholesterol, lowers triglycerides, and it inhibits the LDL cholesterol from oxidation, which is a major process in atherosclerosis. And now we are finding more and more research that it actually helps lower blood pressure. Now, some studies will show negative results. And so people have asked, why do some clinical trials work and why do some not? When they analysed the data, they found that some of the older garlic that was used in tests had high levels of the active ingredient, which is called allicin. Okay, when you buy garlic formulation, not the clove, but if you buy medication, it should be standardized and it should say it has so many micrograms or milligrams of allicin. That's what it's standardized against. They found some of the newer studies that were not giving positive results with garlic had greatly reduced levels of allicin. So in other words, the product had been harvested or prepared where the active ingredient was greatly diminished. And you can see the numbers there was 3 times difference between the older garlic and the newer garlic in the studies that were used. So the new ones were not being effective because they didn't have the active sulfur ingredient. So when they found second brand of tablets employed in a recent negative trial released no detectable amount of allicin, while a third set of tablets with high allicin release gave positive results. So it's very clear. If the garlic is genuine with the phytochemicals in it, it works. If it's been depleted by heat or some other thing, then it may not work. Curcumin from turmeric. Okay, the curcumin is the yellow-orange pigment that's in turmeric. You're all familiar with curcuma or turmeric. I won't go through all the chemistry, but this is all documented biochemical mechanisms for how curcumin can lower your cardiovascular risk, inhibit blood clotting, etc. Okay, so we've looked at how spices can lower cholesterol. There's a second feature, and this is they can also inhibit blood clots. And there are 4, 3 of them I've mentioned here. Ginger and garlic and onions and ginseng are all known to inhibit platelet clumping, leading to blood clots. And this just shows you some ginger, and it's well known that there are terpenoid compounds there that are very potent inhibitors of platelet aggregation. In fact, if we go back to what Ellen White says, she says, in regard to our using spice, I plead not guilty. We have not had spice in our house for 10 years except a little ginger, which we have always used to some extent. Yes?
Just a little question. If you're talking about this, do you mean it is in an uncooked or cooked circumstances? So it doesn't matter, or what is, do you have to take?
Most of the spices are, the phytochemistry is not too much affected by heating. But I will explain a little more about ginger. About garlic. I'm not sure if it's in this first lecture or in the second one, but there's a lot of misinformation about garlic, and we need to clarify that. There are also different herbs that have phytochemicals in them that protect against cancer. Okay, and we again see garlic, onions, chives, shallots. This is all the family of onions, or the allium genus. Ginger and turmeric belong to the same family. Also cardamom is another one there. And then the parsley family, caraway, coriander, cumin, dill, fennel, parsley. These are all belonging to the parsley family. And then we have the mint family. Each of these different 4 groups here have a different type of phytochemistry which have different properties in terms of protecting us against cancer. There's a whole list of about 20 different properties of how these things work, and each group will influence those 20 things in different fashion. This is just some of the pictures that were taken from my backyard. Very easy to grow. You see the sage, thyme, basil, rosemary. The benefit of growing them in your backyard is that they are fresh, and the chemistry, the phytochemistry, is at its peak when you pick them. When you let them sit around, many of the compounds evaporate, and if you buy them in a bottle, they're going to be greatly diminished, and after 6 months they almost don't have much property at all. So if you take many years to finish a bottle of spice or herbs, then it's probably good to throw it away and buy a new one. Here is a very, very nice variety of basil, cinnamon basil. Eating the flowers, usually when I take them to work, I get mobbed by people wanting them because the flavour is so good to add to your salad or whatever. And here are some from the Apiaceae or the parsley family. You're familiar with all of these. Now, I went to the scientific literature to look up how many articles are published about the cancer-protecting properties of these things we're talking about. And this is the list you see. The garlic and turmeric are very much at the top. So if you want to believe which are the best spices to help protect you against cancer, these are commonly used, hopefully, and they are well researched, which probably means the activity is significant. There are many others listed here. And as I've mentioned, there are many phytochemicals. The names of these are listed on the left, and where you find them are on the right. I want to impress you not with a vast array of chemistry. Most of you probably are not interested in all of that, but if you look, you can see that there is not a lot of repetition. Is that correct? You notice that where a phytochemical is found, it's usually in a cluster of plants, and other ones don't have significant amounts of that. So what is the message? To use a variety, because different ones provide different properties. And here is just a list of some that stimulate an enzyme in the liver, GST, which is glutathione S-transferase, and the phytochemicals listed on the left will be found in the substances on the right-hand side. For example, curcumins are found in turmeric and ginger. These, it's the curcumin which we know which will provide the cancer protective property. Here is a list of many of the properties that different spices have to stimulate the liver, to get rid of the cancer, to help wash out things, to stop cancers binding with DNA, to prevent cells proliferating, to induce apoptosis, which is the programmed death of cancer cells. There's so many different things, enhancing immune function, and so different spices have different phytochemicals which have different properties, but all of these are useful in assisting us to fight off cancer. Now, I mentioned before, I'd say a little bit more about garlic. People who consume garlic to a measurable degree, combining many studies, you see here that stomach cancer is reduced 20 to 60%. Colorectal cancer is decreased 10 to 80%. Now you might say, why such a huge range? Well, different studies have different operating conditions with different subjects in different countries, different ages, and different so many things. So that's why you find this. And this is with raw or with cooked, okay?
What is a high intake?
Hmm?
What is a high intake? How much is that?
High is not low.
I mean, how much is that?
Well,
Don't stay or what?
in terms of cloves, usually a half to 1 clove would be considered regular, normal usage, so maybe 1 or 2 cloves a day, versus low would be maybe use of garlic once a week or something like that. So those of you who are interested in biochemistry, garlic has about 40 different sulfur compounds, all with different properties, and they're all very useful. And the smell of garlic is an indication that you have full potency. And we don't have time to get into all the mechanisms, but these molecules can scavenge free radicals. They act as antioxidants. They prevent damage to the chromosomes. And as I mentioned earlier, they stimulate a good friend in your body called glutathione transferase. Now, one of the things that was discovered about 10 years ago was that you must allow garlic to sit or stand, depending on your language. But when you go to prepare garlic, you have to, after you cut it, when you cut it or crush it or chew it, in any way you manipulate the garlic, that stimulates an enzyme called allanase that converts the compound there into the parent compound, allicin. Alleine gets converted to allicin, and allicin is the material from which all the different sulfur compounds are produced. And it takes about 10 minutes for this reaction to take place. So if you are to cut or crush or bruise in any way the garlic and immediately heat it, put it in soup or baking or whatever, you're going to minimize the benefit you get from garlic. So you have to let, after you've cut, crushed, bruised, whatever, you have to let the garlic sit for 10 minutes for the enzyme to work and to generate all of the good sulfur compounds. And then you can put it in your baking, in your soup, in your stir fry or whatever, okay? So just remember that. For full activity, you need to let it sit. Not only garlic, but onions. The Dutch have shown that eating 1/2 of an onion a day can lower your risk of stomach cancer by up to 50%. And again, there is many biochemical pathways that the flavonoids in onions operate. And here we see a picture showing you the content of flavonoids in different varieties of onions. The ones on the left are strong, bitey, hot, whatever word you want to use, you know, you feel the effect. The ones on the right, we call them the sweet onions, the Vidalia onions, the Walla Walla onions. I'm not sure what you call them here, but these are the hot, bitey ones, and these are the sweet. Keep that in mind, because now we're going to look at the inhibition of colon cancer cells. And while all the onions do protect you against colon cancer, the speed and degree at which they work differs. And the deeper and the stronger the curve drops, this is a representation of the greater the protection. The more gentle the graph, that means they're mild acting. So what do you remember about the hot onions? Where do you see them listed here? The northern red, the shallots, these are the hot ones. These are the ones that are producing the more dramatic protection against colon cancer. So those of you who are soft and wimps and don't want to get the strong, full benefit of the onions, you're missing out on the protection. And this is a common observation to keep in mind. If your vegetable tastes a little off, a little sour, like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, this is an indication the food is healthy, because the flavour that isn't sweet, because you're not American, so you're not wanting everything sweet, but with a little bit of tainted flavour towards the bitter or maybe a little unpleasant, This is an indication of rich phytochemical content, which equals protection against cancer. So if you have farmers who are trying to breed more bland vegetables, push them away. We're not interested in that unless we're soft wimps and all we want is bland food. Okay, curcumin also protects against different cancers. Here is my wife's preparation of scrambled egg. It's tofu with some turmeric and parsley and garlic salt with parsley and tomato relish. And we have been able to fool many people thinking they're eating scrambled egg when they're eating tofu. So you can give them a curcumin cancer protective boost and they can believe they're eating egg. So again, we're not going to go through the list, but this is all documented in the literature. Many many biochemical pathways that curcumin intercept or promote if it's something you want, or intercept and block if it's something you don't want, that provides us with protection against cancer. Curcumin is a very strong anti-inflammatory agent, so this is another benefit. Ginger, which belongs to the same family as turmeric, has similar properties but is not as strong, is not as... Okay, so we've talked about cardiovascular disease, lowering cholesterol, lowering blood clots. We've talked about cancer. Now let's talk about diabetes, the world epidemic. Is that right? Everywhere I go, everybody's talking about the epidemic of diabetes. Well, I'm not going to suggest that what we have here is going to take away from the medication, but this will add to your lifestyle program, ways that you can help, what we call adjuncts. Okay, and so we have 5 things listed here, which are well documented and known. You have the prickly pear pads or fruits, you have fenugreek, you have bitter melon or corelli or corella, and you have the turmeric, and you have cinnamon. All of these have been shown, and I'm going to quickly go through the I think at this point I've been told that we should take a break of 1 minute because they're taping these in 1 hour sessions, and I think we're getting close to 1 hour from when I started, so I'll just ramble for 15 seconds and they can make the cut, and then we'll continue with the rest of this talk. Okay, we'll give you a break though. In about 10 or 15 minutes we'll give you a break, but you don't want to leave at this point because this new research on diabetes will, you'll wish you knew about it. Okay, this was published just a few months ago. This is turmeric, and 240 subjects that were pre-diabetic were given 1.5 grams of curcumin. Now, I'm not saying cumin. Cumin is a different spice. Curcumin is the pigment in turmeric, so I'm talking about turmeric, as the picture will show. Okay, keep in mind the picture. This is what I'm talking about. This was followed for 9 months. The researchers watched the people to see how they progress to diabetes. That's of interest, isn't it? We want to stop that progression. Okay, so I brought a pointer. Might be useful if I actually used it. In the curcumin group, there were 0 people who progressed to diabetes that were taking 1.5 grams for 9 months. In the placebo group, you'll notice 16% progressed to diabetes. Okay, this is a measure of the function of the beta cells of the pancreas. So which of the 2 groups had the more effective pancreas? Which beta cells were working better? The turmeric group, and this is significant. If you're familiar with p-values, this is significant. Okay, the peptide also is a measure of the insulin. So the insulin was lower level and obviously working more effectively. And this is a measure of insulin resistance, which we don't want in the diabetic situation. So who had the less insulin resistance? Again, the turmeric group. Okay, now what about cinnamon? Here we have people who were given a rice pudding, 300-gram pudding, and they were given 1 gram or 3 grams of cinnamon. And here is what happened. They took blood samples and measured the insulin levels. Okay, this is not blood glucose, this is insulin levels 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and 2 hours after they had the pudding. And what do you notice? The yellow here has the least rise in insulin. They have the star there represents significant decrease from adding 3 grams of cinnamon to the rice pudding. Another study on cinnamon. This was at primary health care clinics across the United States at military bases, 3 of them. And these were poorly controlled diabetics. They had hemoglobin A1C levels above 7. Okay? So these were type 2 diabetics. And these people were given 1 gram of cinnamon every day for 90 days. And this is the results here. What do we notice? We find that the final hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of your glucose control, in the group that got cinnamon, it is significantly less than in the control group. You see the difference here after 90 days between the initial baseline value and the final baseline value. Even though it has dropped, it's not significant. This is not a significant p-value. Whereas in the cinnamon, this drop of almost 1 unit is highly significant. Okay, this is another study done in China with type 2 diabetes, and they were taking a medication, but these people were also poorly controlled because they had elevated hemoglobin A1C levels. And you'll notice they were given cinnamon extract or a placebo for 90 days. And what do we notice? The placebo, they didn't have any change, but those getting cinnamon were a significant reduction in the fasting blood glucose level, -1, 3 times as much, 360 milligrams. This is 120 milligrams. This was even greater, and these are both highly significant. The hemoglobin A1C again dropped in the group getting 360 milligrams, almost dropped 1% after only 90 days. Okay, this was another study done in Indiana where wheat cereal was given, and this is blood glucose measurements, and you see over 90 minutes when 6 grams of cinnamon were added to the cereal, the blood glucose levels were diminished. This is the first study perhaps that came out that was from Pakistan, and they showed that like 1/3 or 1/2 a teaspoon of cinnamon a day could decrease your fasting blood glucose by about 15 to 30%. And you get the same thing with cholesterol. Cholesterol is also decreased about 15 to 30%. And it's believed that the cinnamon works at the insulin receptor sites. The phytochemicals that are there assist or potentiate the insulin action and help lower glucose intolerance. This is some interesting work on tea and coffee. It was done in the Boston area, Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professional Study, and they showed that both coffee and decaffeinated coffee was associated with significant reduction in risk of diabetes. I'm sure you've heard of this. The tea, the values are generally not significant, whereas with coffee, it's highly significant. And you'll notice it's decaf as well as caffeinated coffee. When you, just looking at the top one here, this is switching caffeinated coffee for caffeinated beverages, soft drinks that have caffeine in them compared with caffeinated coffee. And you'll notice that when people switch from Coca-Cola and Pepsi and these caffeine-containing beverages over to coffee, their risk of diabetes drops significantly. And the reason for this is obvious. The catechins and other flavonoids, the phytochemicals that are there in the berry, and berries are rich in phytochemicals. I'm not recommending you all go out and start drinking coffee, but to illustrate there's consistency in the plant kingdom. And we come back to this later when we talk about blueberries and raspberries and blackberries and cranberries, and all the berries are rich in these pigments. They have the same effect. These berries will reduce the risk of diabetes. And then we have fenugreek. We're coming to the end just in a minute here. We'll give you a break, and I need to get some water. But fenugreek has been used in Indian subcontinent for a long time. We know that it's very rich in a soluble fiber, and this is used to reduce hyperglycemia, and it's commonly added to muffins and bread and other bakery products up to about 10%, and it doesn't adversely affect. Well, recently they've isolated this compound called G2 from fenugreek, and these authors that's published here in the last couple of years were able to show that this compound was more effective than the standard drug that is used, tolbutamide. And you see this is an experiment done with rabbits. This is the normal sort of response, diabetic, and the red represents after taking this compound G2, and the green represents normal rabbits. So in other words, what happens is the glucose intolerance of these rabbits, when they are given this extract of fenugreek, start behaving like normal rabbits in terms of their glucose response. Then we come to Corelli or bitter melon. This gourd you see here, very commonly used in the West Indies and also amongst Oriental groups. They contain saponins, which you can use this either as a fruit or a juice or a vegetable, whatever. And this was a study done in mice just last year, and they found comparing 400 milligrams per gram per day of powder made from bitter melon with the same amount of this common diabetic agent, metformin, looking at fasting blood glucose initially, and here after 5 weeks. And here is the insulin levels. And you'll notice that the effects of the bitter melon are similar to the standard diabetic drug in terms of reducing insulin. You see the reductions here, from here down to here, or from here down to here. And the reduction in fasting blood glucose is also similar, 20 to 30%. And then the last one I think I have here, the pads, Nepalis, or the fruit. Here you see cutting open the fruits. I don't know if you're used to eating this. It's kind of nice pulpy thing with some seeds, but it's very rich in mucilage, which is a soluble fiber, and is commonly used by the Mexicans and others to treat high blood sugar. So in summary of this little section here, I would say that adding turmeric and cinnamon and fenugreek along with bitter melon and prickly pear would be useful for your management of diabetes. There are some other spices that help with brain function. Turmeric, again, because of its strong anti-inflammatory property, and garlic have also been shown to help with senile dementia, at least in experimental animals. And so, as we come to the conclusion, as we look back over what we've said about biblical and 19th century and now 21st century data, I think we could probably agree with Hippocrates when he said back around 400 BC that let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. Patients don't always volunteer to healthcare providers what supplements they're taking, garlic or cinnamon pills or whatever, because they don't realise that these things are having a biological effect. And it's important for health practitioners to know what they're taking because they can have an effect on other situations. Since spices can often enhance, and this is an example where garlic will increase the bleeding time of a common anti-clotting or blood-thinning medicine, warfarin, since spices can often enhance or negate the effect of a conventional drug, it's important for physicians to know what spice or what herb the patient is taking, how often, how much. Very crucial, very critical. So, in conclusion of this lecture, then we'll give you a break. The discriminate use of spices to season your food may have some therapeutic value. The therapeutic use of concentrated extracts of herbs that we use in our food and spices should be monitored by a healthcare practitioner, meaning if you're taking cinnamon pills and you're on diabetic medication, you should tell your doctor what you're doing. It's risky because these things do have an effect. They can negate, they can enhance things, and if the doctor doesn't know all this, then the treatment that he's providing for you may be not good. For those of you who are interested, I do have a couple of books. This is the latest one. We have just a few copies left remaining here at the convention. A guide to the therapeutic use of 45 commonly used herbs.